welcome everyone. I want to wish you a happy, healthy, beautiful day. I took this intro, or I would say affirmation, from our keynote speaker, Dr. Bob Rakowski, who always shares happiness, health, and success on every call. Every moment he has a chance to share value with the world, he does so like nobody else. And today we're going to be talking about reducing pain and inflammation with functional medicine. I think we can all agree that pain is a bummer. Pain will stop you from maximizing your life experience. So it's not about how long you live, it's the quality of your life, and also identifying pain and the discomfort in other people and having the love and appreciation to say, hey, are you okay? Can I offer some help? Or maybe I know someone who has some information that may be able to change your current situation. So we're going to talk about what is inflammation, how do we help buffer this inflammation, and how do we go out and really embrace it in such a way that we can use it as a strength. I heard once that we're only as strong as our weakest link. And certainly when it comes to pain, if we're having too much pain, it shuts off other systems in the body, and it allows you, or puts you basically in a box when it comes to your physical, emotional, and every other potential, really, because we're all connected in those systems. So Dr. Bob, welcome to the call. Great to have you on these calls each week, educating people in many different subjects of health. So welcome. How is everything in Houston today?
Well, always a joy, Eric. Thanks for the beautiful intro. Congratulations, everybody, on investing a part of your day to hopefully get information to get better. Things in Houston are epic. You know, we're already in autumn. How to use that word instead of fall after listening to Robin Sharma. He says every word matters. Nobody wants to take a fall, but there's a lot of people that love autumn. And then, of course, we got the other side of the world where Zaf Khan is in spring, the season of opportunity. So, you know what? I know things are great there. Things are great here. Things are great everywhere if we make them great. So life is good.
When it comes to pain and inflammation, Dr. Bob, how does that inflammatory process work? What's going on there in the body?
Well, let's break down the words. So inflame, that means literally fire within, and ation, the process of a fire within, and it has a very distinct purpose. And, it's almost a segue on words, like you said. People can use that fire within to be very, very positive, to really fuel them to a greater existence, to inspire. And how wonderful that you introduced the progress of Hannah, so amazing, where twice in she's 3.5 decades on this planet, and twice she's battling a brain tumor that she wasn't supposed to survive. First time beat it for a dozen years, and then somehow, something came back, probably the stress of the world. And now looks like she's crushing it. No, not looks like, she is absolutely crushing it. And even the scans are looking phenomenally good. So I believe that all happened just for her to inspire the world. And just another play on words, things happen for us, not to us. And it's up to us to see the good in it. And even going back thousands of years, the Stoic philosophy was very, very simple. It's not what happens to us, it's how we respond to it that's important. So if inflammation is used in a healing way, it can be absolutely phenomenal. But if we allow it to be destructive, well, it can kill us or make us miserable for a long, long time.
Yeah, just when you mentioned about that challenge, it was Steve Harvey when he talked about having that comeback power. My brain just left the room there for a moment, but it was his comeback power. He talks about that moment. I'm not sure if you ever seen that clip of Steve Harvey when he talks about that time where he's doing his stand-ups and he gets that position in I think it was Saturday Night Live, where he went from being really, really in a tight position, dead broke, and got one gig, another gig, flew to New York, I believe it was, and stepped up in a moment of opportunity and really saw himself getting through that really difficult time, and then set himself on a career path, which was pretty epic. So, you know what, well, no matter where you are, guys, you're not down, you're not out. If you're struggling with pain and inflammation, there are ways to actually work through it. Really, from the cellular level point of view, Dr. Bob, why is the inflammatory process necessary? What is actually the purpose of this process for us to develop and for us to grow?
Well, the simple word that or phrase I'm going to use is that inflammation precedes repair, and our body is always and forever remodeling. And keep in mind, we want to remodel. We don't want our tissues getting old and brittle, and they wear out over time. And if we move our body in a better direction, like you and I think most people on this call, we train consistently. We actually purposely create an inflammatory process. And when we do it purposefully with wisdom and direct it and direct the recovery, we finish better, stronger, faster, smarter. But essentially, it's to take something which is broken down or in the process of being broken down or even infected, clearing it out and remodeling better. And that's really the whole purpose of why we have it.
And how do we really distinguish between what's productive and destructive inflammation? Are there any key signs for us to identify what the differences might be?
There might be and there might not be. So there's a speaker named Barry Sears, and I'm going to share my screen real quick because I've got an interesting graphic for a conference that I'm going to be lecturing at later this month, a major international pharmacology conference. Within this article, and this is a 2019 article, it basically says that systemic chronic inflammatory process or inflammation can ultimately lead to several diseases that collectively represent the leading causes of disability and mortality around the globe. So we look at things like diabetes, cardiovascular disease, cancer, depression, autoimmunity, neurodegeneration, sarcopenia or osteoporosis is breakdown of muscle, breakdown of bone, and breakdown of the immune system. All of these things are the result of inflammation spiraling out of control. So any of those symptoms, it's a guarantee. Any of those diagnosed conditions, there's an out of control inflammatory process within the system. But Barry Sears used to talk about silent inflammation. He'd say that inflammation that exists below the threshold of pain. And he says that's what gets you in trouble, because when you have pain, you go, oh, I need to do something. But when it's below the threshold of pain, it literally starts burning you up and burning you out, and you may not even know it's happening until you have something serious going on. So there could be very serious symptoms, or there could be almost no symptoms until there's been serious breakdown in the entire body.
That's really interesting and a very distinct difference between those two. So we want to tune ourselves up. We want to stimulate the body enough so that it's not too much, not too little, finding that sweet spot for everyone. Everyone is different. Everyone has different desires and needs and goals and whatever it may be, to ask permission of our machine to give us a given result or feel a certain way. So how would you recommend that someone monitor this process? I know the acid-alkaline balance is an interesting one. Could you touch on that, Dr. Bob, what the connection is between the inflammatory process, acid-alkaline, and how people might be able to assess where they're at and on that scope?
Well, I wish there were an easy answer to that. A lot of people would say test your pH, your acid-alkaline of your first morning urine, or maybe your saliva. And I taught something called bioterrain around the world for nearly 3 decades. And I used to have a very precise instrument in my office where I'd measure the acid-alkaline balance of blood, saliva, and urine right directly from the fluids. And then oddly enough, that was made a test that was no longer legal in a doctor's office. So pretty fascinating that there's been, interesting changes in how health is delivered or maybe even suppressed around the world. Different topic there. But what I'm going to tell people is not nearly everybody that I've ever assessed, and I do mean everybody, errs on the side of being too acid. And if you look at how things happen, oxygen goes into cell, carbon dioxide comes out, carbon dioxide adds to water in the blood to form something called carbonic acid. It's estimated that just with normal daily activity, with a unit that they use, people make 15,000 units of acid every single day. That's a lot of units. Whereas food, you could eat some very alkaline foods or even some very acid foods, and at most you'll put in your body over the course of the day is maybe 100 units. So, your 1500x or 150x the level that your body's making every single day. So it's kind of hard to keep track of unless I have a YouTube video on doing what's called a saliva pH challenge, where you take your saliva pH before you do anything in the morning, no food, no water, no brushing your teeth. And then you take some lemon water. About 10 cc's, one third of an ounce if you're in this part of the world. And then you test your saliva every minute for the next 6 minutes. And saliva should start out, believe it or not, acid, 6.5 to 6.8. And that's where the enzymes within saliva work ideally. But you acidify the saliva, and then you watch it come up and actually hyper respond. And the sicker the patient, the more acid they are, and I've seen, most cancer patients I see are across the board acid. Their baseline is acid and they never respond at all. And we have to shift that to get them to recover. So many, many factors in that inflammatory process, but I think acid alkaline is one of the most powerful and one of the least addressed in really all of healthcare.
Wow. Do you have any testing videos or anything like that on your YouTube, Dr. Bob, or is it something we could maybe create for the future? Because that would be a really interesting one for people to test where they're at some point in their lives if they can't get to your clinic or
we should. We should create that, because it is a test that people can do at home. And I've got write-ups on it and I've taught it at different seminars, but yeah, why not get one for home use? That sounds like a really good idea.
Excellent. We don't know really. And if there's such an important balance between acid alkaline, I think it's nice to be able to measure this. And it's funny because I went to my former GP. I haven't been to a doctor in about 6 years, but I probably should get checked up pretty soon. I'm turning 40 tomorrow. So, I'm getting old.
Happy beautiful birthday.
Thank you very much. But yes, I went to inquire about getting testing. And this is something, if you go to your GP, guys, you may hit a brick wall. Certainly, if you ask about certain testing. I was told by a holistic doctor before we should get tested for the likes of D3 deficiency twice a year. And when I approached my GP, I asked about this and they said, no, that's nonsense. You don't need to test for that.
Oh my.
And this is in Ireland where we don't get much sun. So I thought that was interesting. I never went back to that doctor because we got into a heated debate over why we should self-monitor certain things. So this is a prime example of why we should be more curious about these things. And if there is such a connection between acid-alkaline balance and our overall health, then we should probably start to monitor this a little bit closer. And when it comes to alkalinity, I absolutely love our top superfood, which is of course in our coffee and tea of choice, Reishi or Ganoderma, one of the most alkaline-rich foods on the planet, of which we will talk more about this later as well, Dr. Bob. But what is the power of alkaline-rich foods? Why is it so critical for us to flood our diet with these alkaline-rich foods?
Well, as kind of in the previous question, we're always making acid. Every energy process makes acid. If you make energy without oxygen, you make lactic acid, and that's even more powerful. If you make energy with oxygen, you make carbonic acid, but we're making a ton of it all day long. And so we have a couple of ways of dealing with it. We can either buffer it, and the body has at least a dozen buffers that are identified. And by the way, they're all enhanced with alkaline-rich foods, but we also need to make sure our elimination routes are good. Our lungs, they're underappreciated in their ability to get rid of acid, but they do that when we sweat acid. Our urine is acid. Our bowel movement should be acid. And when I lecture on this, even doctors, they cringe. Like you can see their backside tightening up. Wait a minute, you mean my bowels are acid? And of course they are. You look at the primary organism in the colon, it's something called acidophilus, acid loving. And when people have an acid colon, it's actually a healthy colon. And interestingly enough, people get rectal itching if they have an alkaline colon, and there's organisms that aren't favorable there. And people don't like to talk about that stuff. But I had a young lady and she said, this is really embarrassing to say, but I have the most itchy backside you could ever imagine. And no doctor's been able to help me. Well, interestingly enough, just really doing a good flush out of that and really seeding with acid type organisms, and acidophilus is the primary, but there's others, and then getting on a microbiome friendly diet. Very, very thankfully, we resolved that. But understand that part of what we needed to do, even though the colon was alkaline in her case, we need to alkalize the entire body, interestingly enough, in order to get lasting benefit throughout. So, the body has different ways of buffering. And in her case, the colon just wasn't doing its job.
When you mentioned actually about itchy rectum, if you would, let's call it what it is. I saw connections before with fungal infections with that the gut microbiome may be out of alignment. Just while we've pivoted on that, could you just touch on the importance or the impact of gut inflammation and how that can really seep out into every area of the entire body if we don't have the microbiome in check?
Yeah, well, whether we're talking top to bottom, so it goes literally from the mouth into where things pass out on the other side, and it's a tube that's 20 something feet long in most people, and you begin to realize that there's a lot of things that can go wrong. So inflammation anywhere in that tract, even in the esophagus, in the mouth. In fact, the mouth it's even considered a marker of a risk of cardiovascular disease, interestingly enough. And keep in mind, we have a lot of organisms in our mouth. You know, it's a human bite. And by the way, humans shouldn't go around biting people, but it's more toxic than a dog bite. So if you start getting, what happens if this is inflamed, some of those organisms can start to get into the systemic circulation. And in different parts of the gut, that can happen the same. So, you know, if we start looking at the small intestine, we start getting undigested food particles into the system where the immune system is going to react against it and create whole body inflammatory process. And so, you know, when the colon's inflamed, interestingly enough, that, you know, they call that colitis, and it's very disruptive to people that have it. And there can be mucus colitis, or there could be ulcerative colitis, and that's just a really extreme of where people can even bleed to death if they're not being real careful. You know, I've had ulcerative colitis patients that they literally have you know, bled into anemia, and you know, I've even had patients threatened with removing their entire colon so they didn't bleed out. And very fortunately, with the right natural program, every patient that I've seen has resolved with even ulcerative colitis, or at least gotten much better, I should say, with ulcerative colitis and in check, and didn't need to have their colon removed. But there are people that have had colons removed because of ulcerative colitis. So pretty significant stuff there.
Wow. And a lot of people may not even realize that that's a possibility, because people reach a certain point and they get certain advice, always get a second opinion or a third opinion, especially when it comes to removing an organ system or having any removals done in the body, because you might need a bit more healing rather than an extraction. But when it comes to commercially raised produce, Dr. Bob, we're always talking about the importance of organic foods. What kind of impact does consuming commercially raised animals and consuming commercially raised crops impact upon our inflammatory process itself inside?
Well, yeah, there was a quote from one of the world's premier organic farmers, and he says, if you think organic food is, you know, expensive, try pricing, you know, cancer treatment, because that's what people are leaning towards. And now there's even a rock solid connection between the processed foods, the commercially produced foods, the systemic inflammatory process, the tissue breakdown, the chronic illness, and even cancer. But I wouldn't necessarily say that every single food that's produced commercially is going to be equally bad, but you know, a lot of it is just plain terrible. I wouldn't even feed it to my dog. And you know, in fact, I tell people our dogs eat organic food, you know, so, you know, the one I just took outside is 16 years old and he's past his life expectancy and he needs a little more TLC, but, you know, he's a good friend and I think he's going to be around for a while and enjoying life because he has a good diet. But, you know, I tell people that there's no universal agreement on what is the best diet. You know, there are people that are getting pretty extreme. Some people are saying you need to be vegan. And I looked into that deeply, interestingly enough. So believe it or not, vegan males have the longest life expectancy of males on a diet. I found that fascinating. But vegan females, the shortest. So guess what? Men and women are different. And there are people that want to do carnivore and people that want to do keto and people who want to do paleo and people want to do the rainbow diet and people want to be pescatarians. And, you know, we just go right on down the line, but we're omnivores. So we should have a little balance of everything, but no consensus on what the best diet is. But the worst diet is the standard American diet, the modern American diet, the processed food diet. And it's killing us. And Eric, if I were to go back and share that screen again, I know our Instagram followers don't have the same luxury, but I'm going to point out here in a moment. Let's get back to that Zoom share screen. When we start looking at these triggers of chronic inflammatory process, you'll notice that diet is listed. And what do they have there? But, you know, basically their icon is a hamburger. And in fact, you know, it's the deadly quartet: stress, toxins, malnutrition, physical inactivity. So keep in mind, when people are getting a burger from a fast food chain, it's probably not organic. It's the, you know, so that means the cow probably had a diet which wasn't good, like, you know, cows eat grass, but this was probably fed grain like corn-fed beef, and then tons of antibiotics, and all of that gets into the meat. And then it's probably using, you know, a grain bun, which has genetically modified grains, genetically modified gluten, which are known triggers of autoimmunity, chronic inflammatory process. And if it's cheeseburger, you know, it probably has, you know, some dairy, which again is loaded with antibiotics and severely processed. And maybe even the piece of lettuce in that case would be, you know, just a pesticide-soaked garnish. And, you know, if you really understood what you were getting, you probably wouldn't do it. You know, we've been sold this idea, you know, with happy people on commercials, hey, come get this food, which will, by the way, slowly kill you. So stay away from that, from most commercial foods, unless you're very diligent to know that maybe it's from a family business where they're, USDA certified organic, and just treat the animals and plants humanely, but also don't overly process it, depleting the goodness that would be in it.
Wise words, guys, wise words. You really do have to treat the system, the delivery pipeline that we get our foods from, with respect. And as I heard Paul Chek once mentioning, how do we change the way our food is harvested? Where you put your money. What are you investing your money in? Because ultimately that's what companies are tracking, is where is the money. Start growing your own. Get involved with growing some of your own produce. I don't know if you guys have ever seen, I'm sure you've seen this, Dr. Bob, the Masterclass website. Does that ring any bells? It's literally called Masterclass.
Okay.
But they get experts in different fields from every walk of life. So whether they're actors talking about acting for camera, whether they're gardeners. There's a very interesting guy called the Gangster Gardener, who started growing crops in underprivileged neighborhoods across LA. So he was growing crops in little sections along the streets. And of course, he got fined for trespassing. But you literally can grow crops anywhere. I just thought it was a really great platform for you guys to learn new skill sets. There's lots of great value there. I'm not an affiliate for a masterclass, but I just thought it was a really interesting platform to upskill in different areas, particularly when it comes to growing your own foods. You can get some great things on YouTube as well, but this is very detailed, how to start small, so you can start to grow, what to put in the soils, how to cultivate, what you can use, household items to add more character and life to your home, because I think those things are really important for your stress as well, because the more plants we have around, the more beneficial I think our environment will be as well.
I actually want to spin off on that for a moment, because there's so many things that we take for granted that we underappreciate. And one of my favorite mentors, I affectionately call him PhD, Tom Morris, PhD philosophy, PhD religion. And people might know the parable of the sower and the seed, but he spills it off in a great way to say that ultimately it's good soil that makes all the difference. And he says, as people, we want to be fertile soil. We want ideas to incubate and sprout and bear good fruit within us. And it's a really good metaphor, but he had a conversation with a soil scientist, and a teaspoon of soil has something like 1 million+ organisms. And there's a powerful partnership between the soil and the microbes and the seed and the water and the sunshine that creates this miracle that we call life. Sometimes we just sit there and we think, okay, well, I just put a seed in the ground and it grows, but there's so much more to it. And when we come to realize that there's so many miracles and everything matters, have good soil that you grow your food in, but be good soil that you grow your life in. That's probably one of the most thorough metaphors that I've ever heard. And I've studied a lot, so, and Tom Morris, same thing, he's now 70 years old with, double PhD for nearly 50 of those years, and read the best of the best. And he'll tell you, be good soil is the best metaphor he's found.
Beautiful. That's a quote of the day for sure. I love that. Be good soil. When it comes to movement as well, Dr. Bob, how important is consistent movement for the body to help fight inflammation? Because we're in a sedentary time, I believe, for a lot of people, with too much sitting, too much work at the computer, with the posture kind of starting to lock up and seize up and drawing on our life force energy. So what have you noticed in your career when it comes to movement? How important is it?
It's critical. So life is motion. Einstein said nothing happens till something moves. But for those on the Zoom, again, I shared the screen of that article on systemic chronic inflammatory process leading to all the things that make people miserable and ultimately kill them. But look at the two of the things on there: obesity, and that's one called out, and the other is physical inactivity. And so, there's very few people, and you and I have crossed this line a few times in our life. There's very few people that move too much and recover too little. We're in the tiny percentage. And when we do it long enough, we go, okay, I don't want to do that. I want to move just enough so that I keep moving forward. And by the way, progress is the thing we want to measure. What's your body composition like? What's your sleep like? What are your joints like? And now it's so easy to get heart rate variability. I don't get any override on this Oura ring, but this Oura Oura ring tells me my heart rate variability, my sleep, my pulse, how much I'm moving. And it's so easy to wear. And these things are so affordable, or a Fitbit or whatever you want to wear. But ultimately, there's a threshold for the number of steps that people take where they fall into clinical depression. And most of the world doesn't take that number of steps. Pete Cohen has the number memorized. It's something like 5,600.
Yeah, I think it was 4,600 steps or 4,400 steps in a day. And once you pass that threshold, you're good.
Yeah. Well, if you don't, I don't know if you're good, but if you don't get there, you're bad. Your probability of depression goes up exponentially. But you start looking at, and there's even phrases that say sitting is the new smoking. Well, it likely is, because we've got, thankfully, more people are saying, okay, smoking's really bad. And by the way, vaping is too. So don't think you get a pass on that. It's probably going to kill you slower, but it'll likely still kill you. But listen, when people are not moving around, we have a problem. And so, now it's the law of association. I just finished a book called Living with the Seal, by a guy named Jesse Itzler, who's a billionaire who hired David Goggins. Basically, I was inspired to step up my training just from reading that. And, when we get exposed to people like you and your Instagram and your Facebook posts and your Reishi warriors, you and Isa are profoundly inspiring. Those 200,000 people, they're beginning to fall into place, because the world is saying, hey, what this couple has, I want. And what you have is passion and diligence and wisdom and drive and a purpose to share. And that's one of the things that I love most about each of you, and by the way, I can say that about a lot of people that I'm seeing by name on both the, Instagram and on the Zoom. These are people that care and want to make the world better and are stepping up by example, taking better care of themselves.
Well, thank you for that, Dr. Bob. Yeah, I think it is really just about moving and inspiring other people to be curious, just to move the body. And, I find that's very interesting about lack of movement is the core starts to weaken. And when the core weakens, the organs start to drop in the body. So without that stability for the spine and those inner organs, really things just try to become a drag on the body, So I think it's important for people to stay consistent with that and keep themselves in a good standing, because once things start to collapse, everything starts to go downhill. So literally core stability is such an important part of our training, and obviously something that we like to share with people. And of course, getting onto all fours to condition the body in a quadrupedal manner creates so many benefits for reconnecting our cognitive function, but also having a fun association with training, which I think a lot of people have moved away from because they associate it with pain rather than with progress. But I would love to just ask you as well, Dr. Bob, when it comes to painkillers and other medications, why do you think this culture of people just, if I have a pain, okay, let me take a medication for this? What's going on there? What can be done about this? Or is it too far gone for most people? They just say, well, that's the process I'm taking.
Well, if they've made up their mind that, health comes in a pill, they're going to have likely a very unfun ending. Yeah. And so, horrible story. I had a gentleman come in, this now probably goes back about 2 years, but I hadn't seen him for a little bit. And he had a younger wife. And I said, by the way, how's your wife? And he looked at me and said, she's dead. And I was shocked. I said, oh my gosh, what happened? Accident? What? And he goes, no, the opioids got her. And I said, what happened? He says, she hurt her knee and the doctor gave her an opioid painkiller. She became addicted, couldn't break the addiction, and died. Well, in 2008, in this part of the world, in the US, they have come to realize that prescription opioids killed more people in 2008 and every year since than automobile accidents did. It's just a crime. So, if it's a non-opioid, can you have problems with aspirin? Sure. People die from aspirin, from GI bleeding. What about Tylenol or acetaminophen? Well, you mix that with alcohol, especially, it's really bad for the liver, but in and of itself, it's bad for the liver. And people say, well, what about ibuprofen? Well, it's bad on the kidneys. And so ultimately, if someone on occasion overdoes it and thinks maybe that's a reasonable choice, it's not what you do once in a while that's a problem. But if you're consistently doing it, you're not addressing cause and effect. And, the FDA's guidelines are very clear. With medication, they recommend lowest dose, shortest duration. And there's plenty of people that are just plain overdoing it to the detriment of their wellness. So, just keep in mind, if you're doing something that's harmful to your body and you don't stop doing it, but medicate away from the negative effects, ultimately it's going to get worse and worse and worse to the point where you can't medicate away anymore. So, a little bit now and then, probably okay for nearly everybody, but too much, not good for anybody.
Yeah, and you've talked at length on a number of calls about the root cause approach with functional medicine, so an area that you've really excelled in over the last 3+ decades. You really look at what is going on inside the body. How do we use functional foods? How do we use nature's pharmacy to provide us with the healing tools in order for this beautiful, perfect machine to do its job? And the more we've moved towards convenience and modern living for a lot of countries around the world anyway, we're moving further away from health, further away from connection to ourselves and connection to other people, and not really living our best lives. So what are some of those functional foods, those anti-inflammatory foods that you would recommend as part of your daily protocol? And what are some of the most inflammatory foods then that you would tell people to really keep clear of?
Well, first and foremost, there can be some variability in that, right? So it's over 2,000 years old that they said one man's food's another man's poison. So if you have a food that doesn't agree with your body, it's likely going to be pro-inflammatory. But back to the idea, if it's processed, it is going to edge towards inflammatory, to being inflammatory of the system. And the more processed, the worst. So as a general rule, if God made it, it's okay. If man made it, stay away. That's Jack LaLanne. But keep in mind, you also have to digest it and, not have a leaky gut. So there's a lot of different factors there. But when we start going to categories of foods besides whole, fresh, natural, organic foods, fish oils, one of the best anti-inflammatories out there that doesn't get a lot of talk. And one of my mentors said 30 years ago, maybe even more than that, he said, everybody's omega-3 deficient until proven otherwise. And I've used that mindset in clinical practice. And by the way, those are essential fatty acids. You can't get by without them. You need them. And most people don't get enough. And then we start going into the superfood category, and Reishi or Ganoderma certainly are favorites. But, someone asked me to do a talk on cannabis. And I tell people, I don't have any experience. I don't know, but I'll study it. So I read 2 books and 50 PubMed studies. And it's fascinating. In the US, we have states that have legalized cannabis and states that still have it illegal. The states that have legalized it, their opioid problem has virtually disappeared. So, or at least it's dramatically reduced. And so this has been known, and it's pretty interesting to study the history of it, but it's a superfood and it's a well-documented superfood. And when used appropriately, the whole plant, and not trying to get mind altered by just the THC component, even that can be good. But what about Reishi? Consensus, safe, effective, no contraindications, no drug interaction, no known toxicity, legal everywhere in the world. And, we're co-investors in a company where we have it infused in coffee and tea and this, wonderful drink that I finished called the CXT, a brain drink. No contraindications, no warnings in 40 countries that we're operating in. Why? Because there's just no downside to it. Very, very powerful.
Yeah, and it's kind of hard to comprehend. I got some feedback this week. I think I was mentioning to you as well from a gentleman who just saw one of our health videos. He couldn't comprehend that he never heard of this and that there were so many studies on this superfood. Now, I have followed up with him since. So, his disbelief and skepticism has narrowed because he's gone on to PubMed and he's seen all these studies and he's getting that information and he's doing that education himself. But it is pretty mind-blowing. But when it comes to the inflammatory process, what is Reishi? What is it? Some of the proven data on Reishi and its controlling of the inflammatory process and buffering that whole process in our bodies?
Well, having studied clinical nutrition now for well over 3 decades, one of the things I know is that it from what I've seen, it controls the inflammatory process by more mechanisms than any other plant that I'm aware of. So you start looking at that and saying, how many ways does the body have to modulate the inflammatory process? Dozens. And Reishi Ganoderma, taps into most of those mechanisms. And I think in time, maybe, even though we have 15 plus identified, we're probably even going to find more. But what I like to tell people is, people often ask, what will it do for me? Well, I don't know if it'll help whatever you're dealing with, but it sure won't hurt. Why don't you give it a try? Has been my consistent advice. And, even the regulators are okay with that. If we say, your rheumatoid arthritis is going to go away, and by the way, there are cases when that's happened, we get ourselves in trouble. If we say your fibromyalgia is going to go away, and there's cases where that happened, we get ourselves in trouble. We can't make any health claim, and we won't, but oddly enough, you give the body a nudge in the right direction, modulate the inflammatory process, alkalize it, give it the nutrients that it needs, drive the parasympathetic nervous system, put the brakes on cortisol, both at the level of the adrenals and reduce the stress hormones in the bloodstream. Most people feel a pretty remarkable benefit, and many people feel it really fast.
Yeah, my mom was the first person. My in-home clinical trial with a skeptic, the biggest skeptic I knew in my life, which is great. You know, skepticism is great until you put it to the test. And if you're still skeptical, then you've got a bit of a problem. But she no longer was skeptical after 48 hours. By her estimation, Dr. Bob, I gave her Reishi spores, and she had a 90% reduction in inflammatory pain in her joints within 48 hours. And this is when I first was exposed to Reishi, and I was fairly ignorant to what this could actually do, but I was blown away. I said, you know what, I'm going to be sharing this. This is a done deal. This is the real deal. And you know what, not looking back, and it's powerful to actually have this as a tool to help people to get where they want to go. And you mentioned supplements earlier. Fish oils, of course, and absolutely that it's clean. If it's a clean source, make sure it's tested, guys, as well. But any capsulated supplement it's in a capsule. And as you mentioned before at a lecture you did in Dublin, Dr. Bob, it reminds us of taking medications. And not many people enjoy the process of taking medications, but we have this in coffee and tea. What a beautiful delivery system that Mr. Bernardo Chua, our CEO and founder, come up with. Can you just speak to how effective this has been as a protocol for your athletes and for all your patients and for your family? Because, you know, health isn't always convenient, but when it comes in a cup, it doesn't get any easier than that.
Well, you know, when you start looking at different categories of patients, when they have a lot of motivation, they tend to be very compliant. So my professional athletes, while they were in their season, while they were in their sport, while they were looking for that Olympic gold medal or that world championship or that next multi-million-dollar contract, or maybe parts of all the above, you know, they were very diligent and compliant. But, you know, almost to the person, when the season ended, when the career ended, they slacked off. And when you get people that drink coffee or tea, they never need to be reminded. They never plan to quit. And I often tell the story, you know, it goes back now about a decade, but I had a police officer come in, you know, a decade ago, and he says, you know, Dr. Bob, I've got good news and bad news. I said, all right, well, I like good news. Tell me the good news. He said, well, I met the love of my life. I'm getting married. I said, well, what could be the bad news? He says, you know, I've got severe genital herpes. I have such a high stress job that it's ruining my love life. You know, he says, I'd like to have at least a good honeymoon. Can you help me put this thing in remission? So I put him on a really comprehensive protocol. And, you know, you can go to PubMed and you can look up different things with, you know, blocking viruses, and vitamin C will do it, and zinc will do it, and colostrum will do it, and certainly reishi or Ganoderma will do it. And we put him on all those things. And very thankfully, he had a complete and total remission, and then he had a good honeymoon. But about 60 days after we started, he says, okay, looks like we got it under control. I don't want to do this for the rest of my life. And he stopped essentially all the supplements, but he didn't stop the coffee that he would drink. And as a police officer, get this, he was drinking 9 to 10 cups a day. So he felt so much better on the reishi-infused, Ganoderma-infused coffee that he continued to drink it. Well, you know, he's been in earlier this year, and we had a conversation. And ultimately, how you doing? Hey, I think I'm cured. I haven't had a problem since that very thing. Now, it's likely that if they were to do some type of, you know, high-level genetic testing, they'd find that his genome still has that viral DNA in it. But because his immune system is so healthy and so many things are moving in the right direction, not a single outbreak. So we're talking a decade later. So, you know, by the way, that's an obvious one. But what about people that every day are getting a little more acid? Well, they're taking a step towards degenerative disease or cancer. What if we get them a little more alkaline with what we're doing? What if we buffer their stress? What if we get them sleeping better? What if we get their brain working better? What if we do all the above? And you know what? Plenty of people are, if they're really aware of their bodies, will realize we are doing all the above. It's very powerful.
My last question, Dr. Bob, just in regards to the inflammatory process, and you mentioned a certain condition around, I won't mention the condition, but if people were to look at, you know, sources for information on this, where would they go? I know you mentioned PubMed is a great place to find some of these studies. Could you just maybe do a screen share for the recording if anyone wants to do their own research? Of course, guys, we do have an incredible Facebook group which goes through numerous resources around the health benefits of reishi and shares some testimonies, of course. But of course, we can't make any health claims, but these are stories that are real and pretty impactful as well.
So the screen I'm going to share will just be, you know, I don't necessarily like Mr. Google, but that's what showed up on my thing. But if I just go to the bar and I type in pubmed.gov, and notice I just type in the PU and it grabs it because I go there often. And there we are. And so, yeah, we like the term reishi. So let's just type that in for the fun of it and see what we get. You know, 1,361 studies. Now, oddly enough, that's my favorite name, and it tends to be in the rest of this part of the world. But now I type in Ganoderma and 3,127 studies, and we start looking down, and you know, how about the anti-cancer effects? Here they're talking about nutrition cosmeceutical. What does that mean? It literally means you're going to look better with these nutraceuticals. Your cosmetics, your skin are going to get better. Mycochemical. And by the way, we know that the mycochemicals can actually kill off bacteria, and some of the worst around. And we keep going on. Here's one that talks about the cardiovascular system. This one talks about immunomodulation, meaning if there's allergy, it'll calm it down. If there's autoimmunity, it'll calm it down. If there's a low immune function, talking about infection or cancer, it'll help. And we just keep going on and on and on. And I tell people it's probably harder to find a condition that Ganoderma hasn't been researched at to find effective than there is to find support for whatever you're looking for.
Beautiful. And if you guys put in inflammation as well in there with Ganoderma or Reishi as well, I'm sure that you'll get those specific studies as well. So just conscious of time, I know you guys have a couple of questions. Dr. Bob, have you 2 minutes just to address one or two questions, or are you wrapped?
Of course, I'll stop the share, but 156 studies on Ganoderma and inflammation. So powerful there.
There we go. But as we always mention, the best clinical trial to run is your own, and experience trumps knowledge. So please go ahead and get that experience. Reach out to Dr. Bob or whoever invited you to this call. And if we are affiliate partners or ambassadors, then go back to the person who introduced you. I see a question here on Instagram. We'll address Zoom as well. As someone asking, can you please recommend how many spores for an 11-year-old boy would you recommend with Graves and a nodule that they should take?
Oh boy. Well, if he's 11 with Graves, there's something serious going on. And what I tell people, no known toxicity, no known drug interactions, certainly thyroid benefit and autoimmune benefit, and I like to do for a period of time, 2 every waking hour. And that's safe. That's fine. I mean, we've done that with kids before, but an 11-year-old with Graves, there's likely some extreme toxic insult, possibly a really bad infection, possibly a heavy metal, possibly all the above. And so we want to get that looked at from a functional point of view. But Graves, that being the autoimmune thyroid circumstance, that one can be risky. That one can be life-threatening. I have a Graves case that I took on a few months ago, and this woman needed medication for a period of time because you can have cardiac arrest. You can push your metabolism and speed your heart rate up so fast that you can actually have an irreversible cardiac event. And now we're 3 months into it, and this girl is off of medication and doing absolutely fantastic.
Oh, wow.
But our red tea, cordyceps, has even more direct benefits specifically to thyroid and Graves. So I like the idea of 2 every waking hour, and maybe our red tea frequently, or even, it depends on what part of the world they're in, but the CXT has cordyceps. And we might even have a new coffee blend coming out very, very soon. Depends on where they are in the world, that maybe it has that and maybe even a little more in it. So powerful stuff.
Wow. Laura, I would say maybe reach out to Dr. Bob on his social media, or email the naturalmedcenter@gmail.com, where you can actually bring that doctor-patient relationship together. So Dr. Bob, you can really go into that in more detail. But I hope your son is feeling, or your brother, whoever that young gentleman is, feeling much better sooner. Questions here from Hannah. What is a better alternative to Tylenol?
Well, we're talking reishi. So why not spores? Why not fish oils? Ultimately, we want to figure out what's causing it. Are you not moving enough? Are you moving too much? Are you not getting enough sleep? Are you having a very, very poor diet? Why is the body having this chronic process? Is there a structural imbalance? And is there a little bit of all the above? And ultimately, we got to figure out what's causing it. But, for symptomatic relief, the reishi spores, Ganoderma spores, very, very powerful.
Beautiful. I see a question from Molly. Dr. Bob, what OG products and quantity would you recommend to wean a 78-year-old man off of simvastatin medications, or statin medication? The patient tested with a high cholesterol level 3 months ago and doesn't have high cholesterol anymore after the second cholesterol test.
Well, simvastatin's a poison. Those statin drugs are. And so what they found out, Molly, specifically, you can go to British Medical Journal, and I'll even share the study now because I can do that so easily. But what they found out is that they were really wrong about cholesterol in the vast majority of cases. What they found out is that high cholesterol after the age of 60 is protective and produces longevity. I think it's 92% of 60-year-olds. I might just have to open a cardiac lecture and find that real quick, but I ought to be able to do that. When you start looking at, the pill for every ill model is really, really broken. And ultimately, we want to realize that is not the answer. And when they take people that are in their 70s and start giving them cholesterol medications. They're harming them. They're doing, unless the person has really bad lifestyle choices. And what do you do when you have a bad lifestyle choice? You make a better lifestyle choice. And so I'll share a story. I had a patient come in, and this guy's been a patient for over 30 years. And, way back when, he was an athlete, he was doing a lot of good things every single day to take care of himself. And he moved away for a period of time. And he came in and he says, well, Dr. Bob, he says, I'm a mess. I said, well, what's going on? He says, every joint in my body hurts. I can't get out of bed. Things are absolutely terrible. And I said, well, what's different? He says, well, I went to the medical doctor and, suddenly I had high cholesterol and high triglycerides and high blood pressure, and they put me on a bunch of different drugs. And he says, and I just have been feeling lousy ever since. I said, well, what caused the high cholesterol, the high triglycerides, everything else? He says, well, I guess I stopped exercising and I stopped eating appropriately. I said, well, I have an idea. Why don't you start exercising and start eating appropriately? It's like, why would that be rocket science? But so Molly, if you type in this in the Google search engine, PMID :272-92972, here's what it says. High cholesterol, LDL, the ones that the medicine says you should stay low, the things that the statins poison, is inversely associated with mortality. That means death rate in 92% of people over the age of 60. 92%. So that means 92% of the time when medicine makes that suggestion, they're actually leading the patient to an early grave. So, is he in the 8% or is he in the 92%? Well, here's what I'm going to tell you. There's a 92% probability that he's in the 92%. But ultimately, we want to figure out what's causing the problem, and we want to fix that. So I'm actually I'll put this in the chat. That'll make it maybe a little easier to share.
Thank you for sharing that one, Dr. Bob. My mom was put on statins a number of years ago, and I really was upset about that. I gave her that advice about diet and lifestyle because seeing what I saw about statins and some of the issues that were associated with that medication. And of course, almost 3 months to the day after she's been taking it, she broke out with huge bruises all over her body. She went into her local chemist. She felt horrific, went in super weak, gaunt, very low energy, bruised from head to toe, and went in, and the chemist actually looked at her and said, are you on statins meds? And they're like, you need to get off them right now. Look at your body. So, the simple things, we can't rely on these rolling the dice on these medications, I believe. Get good advice.
Well, and by the way, we don't give medical advice on this, right? But we do give information. But if you go to a pharmacist, what they'll tell you is you don't need to wean statins. And everybody on statins should be taking coenzyme Q10. So very, very powerful, and it poisons the body's ability to make that essential molecule.
Yeah, and she wasn't on CoQ10 either, ironically enough.
Yeah, before I close with closing comments, I want to share one other thing. So, when we're partnered with this wonderful company, they also are partnered with a brain technology called NeuroTracker. And interestingly enough, this is something that's used to determine battle readiness for military special forces. And they're even seeing it in athletes. So by the way, if you keep track of your NeuroTracker score every day, you'll know if you're moving in the right direction, you're probably not overly inflamed. And if you're moving in the wrong direction, you probably are inflamed, because the brain is one of those tissues that's going to be most impacted. So as we wrap up this beautiful day, I like to end with 4 questions. So the first question is why? Why'd you take the time to join us today? So many of the things you could do. Second question is the answer to the first. Why not? Why not connect with people that are committed to making the world better? And remember, it always starts with you. Your better world starts with your better you. And we have wonderful strategies to make that happen. Next question is why not you? Someone's going to apply some of this information. Some of you may even start consuming Reishi or Ganoderma consistently, and you may get it in coffee and tea. And some of you might say, man, I want to partner with these guys because we want to partner with hundreds of thousands to add value to the world. And the final question is why not now? The longer you wait to act on information, the least likely you are to act on information. So if someone referred you to the Zoom, to the Instagram Live, to the replay, whatever, get back to them and say, you know what, this sounds good. Let me add it to my life. And with that said, I'm Dr. Bob Rakowski, absolutely knowing that we can all be happy, healthy, and successful.